When you think about marriage, what comes to mind? For most of us, right, it's a union between two people. But what if I told you that, according to the source material we're digging into today, modern marriage isn't a two-party deal at all? The argument is that there's a third, often invisible, partner at the table. So let's break this whole idea down.
And that really brings us to the absolute core question of this entire argument. When two people get married, is it just them, or has a third party, in this case, the state, silently joined their union and in doing so fundamentally changed the whole contract? This is the central idea we're going to unpack together.
All right, so to really wrap our heads around this three-party concept, we've got to go back in time. The source material we're looking at says that to understand what marriage is today, you first have to understand what it used to be.
So the argument goes something like this. Way back when, before the 20th century, marriage was pretty much a private affair. You can think of it as a contract between a man, a woman, and, their families. The government, it just wasn't really part of the equation. It was seen as a natural domestic relationship, not a civil one. And believe me, that distinction is absolutely crucial to this whole viewpoint.
This quote really nails the heart of that original idea. The authority came directly from the family, the natural father and mother, not from some government office. So this perspective starts from a place where a union is built on family permission, not state permission.
But then, as the argument goes, something huge started to shift. That private agreement began to transform into something way more public and regulated. You guessed it, the state started to step into the picture.
This viewpoint actually charts this change over centuries. It points way back to the 1700s as the beginning of the shift. Then you get to the 1780s, and you start seeing historical figures actively working to redefine marriage as a civil contract. Fast forward to the 20th century, and boom, the state-issued marriage license becomes a non-negotiable requirement. According to this view, every single one of these steps moved marriage further away from the family and pulled it closer to the state.
And this whole historical shift is what leads us to the modern definition of marriage, which the source presents as a completely different kind of contract, like a whole new ballgame.
So, here it is, the big reveal. The source, pulling from an Illinois appellate court, says that a state-sanctioned marriage isn't a two-party agreement anymore. Nope, it's a three-party contract, and the state is now a permanent and very powerful third party in the union.
Now, to really get the implications here, you have to look at the specific language the law uses. When marriage is defined as civil, this perspective holds that it's being intentionally separated from everything else. It's not religious, and it's not natural in that old sense of family tradition. It is a legal creation, pure and simple, of the state.
And the argument gets even more granular with this next distinction. It splits the idea of a man from a person. A man is seen as a term of nature, but a person, that's a creation of civil law, a legal entity. The idea here is that when you get that marriage license, you're not just acting as you're acting as a legal person operating under the state's authority. Okay, and this right here, this might just be the most important point in the entire argument. In a state-sanctioned civil marriage, the couple doesn't actually set the terms of their own agreement. The law does. This means the state, as that third party in the contract, gets to define all the rights and obligations of the relationship, and get this, can change them at any time just by passing new laws.
So all of this builds up to the central conflict that's presented in the source material, a direct, head-to-head comparison between what it calls holy matrimony and the state's version of marriage.
So let's look at this side by side. On one side, you've got holy matrimony. Its authority comes from God, it involves just two parties, and it's seen as a private covenant. Then, on the other side, you have state-sanctioned marriage. Its authority comes from the state, it has three parties, and it's a public civil status. From this perspective, these aren't just slightly different flavors of the same thing, they are two completely separate institutions.
So you might be asking, why does this distinction even matter so much? Well, the source argues the stakes are incredibly high, and they all center on one of the most personal parts of family life, the children.
Okay, so the source material drops this seriously provocative quote to frame its biggest concern. Each child belongs to the state. The author uses this idea to argue that when you enter into a civil marriage contract, the ultimate authority over any children from that union is actually transferred away from the parents and to the state.
So here's how the source connects those dots. It claims that under the old, natural law, parents had the primary rights to their children, but by getting a marriage license, they are voluntarily placing their family under the state's legal authority.
The argument is that this one act unwittingly transfers those primary rights, basically making children wards of the state, where the government, not the parents, gets the final say on their welfare.
So, after laying out this entire, pretty complex argument, the source material doesn't just give you a simple answer. Instead, it concludes by turning the whole thing around and posing a final challenge directly to you, the reader. The first question cuts right to the chase. If someone believes marriage is an institution created by God, then why, the author asks, would they then turn around and grant authority over that same institution to the state?
And it follows up with this one, which really hammers the same point home. If the blessing for a marriage is supposed to come from God, why is a second blessing needed from the government? The source is basically asking, isn't one authority enough? Which one really matters?
And finally, the argument is wrapped up in this really powerful biblical analogy. Is getting a marriage license like rendering unto Caesar the things that are God's? In other words, is it giving something over to the state that should never have been the state's to have in the first place?
And the source material leaves us with this final, very well-known verse. It really serves as the author's closing statement, implying that any third party, including the state, that inserts itself into the union is the man this verse warns us against. It's a pretty provocative final thought to an argument that challenges the very definition of one of our oldest institutions. Thanks for joining me for this breakdown.